Hey everyone. Today my guest is John Burns, and I wanted to bring him on because he's an expert but also a writer. And so the way I found him is because I learned that he posts daily something about what he's doing. So something like a current issue that he's dealing with, either ERP or EPM. And so that's how John and I found each other. And I find, his writing so relevant that I wanted to bring him on here and have this interview. So, John, first tell us a little bit about you. Tell us, a little bit about your background. Um, and then I'll ask you about the writing. But first, who is John Burns? And welcome, by the way.
Thank you. Thank you, April. My name is John Burns. Currently, I'm the Senior Director of Finance Systems and Controls at Summit Behavioral Health. I've spent probably the last 20 to 25 years specifically in the ERP space. I've worked with just about every system, SAP, Oracle, Microsoft, PeopleSoft, JD Edwards, so just about every ERP system, and then EPM systems like Hyperion, OneStream, on things of that nature. And so that's my background is to basically implement, improve those systems. And I also dabbled a little bit in AI, in RPA, and the newer technologies as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. And tell us a little bit about why you write. You have these, like I said, really relevant things that you write about that come from, your daily experience. So why did you start that?
I did it as a form of therapy, believe it or not. It became where I had so much bundled up inside me, and it became an outlet. And shortly, I think after or before the first of this year, I said, I need to just get this stuff out of me, and maybe it will help other people. That was one thing I kind of looked at in my career is how can I give back to others? Because, working with systems the way I do and my place in many companies, I don't have a direct access to make people's lives better. And so when I have teams, I often, mentoring and coaching, and then also want to make sure that they're reaching their goals, what they want to be out of life. But this gave me another outlet to say, this is some of the stuff that I've experienced, or this is the stuff that I'm going through. And my topics usually come from things that are currently going on in my personal life, in my job, or conversations that I'm having with people. The topics will pop into my head, and then they'll ruminate a little bit, and then I just spit them out on paper, or not, maybe not on paper, but
Yeah.
into the web.
Metaphorical paper.
Yeah, rhetorical paper. Yes.
Yeah, absolutely. No, that makes a lot of sense. Therapy makes a ton of sense because there, like you said, things just can kind of get so jumbled up in there. And so you now get to share it with others, but also it helps you to organize, your thoughts and even your processes probably as you're going along.
Yep.
So one thing that you wrote about, and that comes up a lot, when it comes to like you talk about implementation and also improving systems, is data. And I've seen you write about this, fairly extensively. And so the first question is, where does the data belong? Like back in, '08, like when I was hiring for, data management positions and things like that, it was always in IT. And
Hmm.
now we're bumping up against this challenge of who should own the data, like who owns it, but who should own it, like where's it going? And so give me some of your thoughts and insights on the ownership of the data.
In my world, and my philosophy is that the business always owns the data unless it's data that's directly impacting IT. And so it would always be any kind of business data is owned by the business and needs to be, um, I would say managed by the business. And what I see IT is the caretakers of the data. They're the ones to make sure that it stays safe, that it stays, together in the source of truth, whatever the system is. But the business are the ones that really make the decisions, what the data is, what the meaning of it is, and how it needs to be utilized to tell the story of the business. Uh, because in my opinion, that's what data does. It tells your story. Um, and so the business are the real owners of it. But, IT plays an important part as they're the caretakers of the data. So it really has to be a good partnership between both.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And and so when it comes to that partnership, how can you make it better? Like again, a lot of like back in, like I said, 10, 15 years ago, it was squarely in IT and it's evolved over the last, decade or so. And so how do you manage that partnership? How do you manage, tell us about some of the challenges that you've run up against with data and how do you work through them?
I think the challenges are uh, making sure that everybody understands what the data means. I've seen it in many situations where even within the company itself, in different areas of the company, data can mean different things. And this even gets more complex is when companies like acquire another company, and then you begin to have to understand, what an account is or what a customer is, and so it's building that data dictionary, and getting that spread across the company that, okay, we all agree that this is what, a customer means or an account is. And, or if, especially if data is used in a calculation or a calculation is used to get that data, that everybody agrees that's the calculation that creates this data. And it is creating that framework and the data dictionary and the rules that surround that data, and then have data stewards where you can. Some companies aren't big enough to have data stewards in every place, but have data stewards manage that data um,
Mm,
for each specific area. And
okay.
I think the go
Can I
ahead.
stop you real quick? Tell me what is a data steward? And is that someone that the business hires or is that someone that IT hires?
Usually it's in the business, in
Okay.
my experience, is they're the person that understands the data in their area, understands what it means, and when changes come along, they're the ones to steward it through the system or through the process. Um,
Okay.
and one other thing that I've done in the past, and still continue to do, is we have groups, a group meeting, like a roundtable, that we get together once a month and say, for example, if somebody wants to add an account to the ERP system, they come in front of the committee or the group, if you will, and say, we need to add a fifth sales account. And then somebody will say, well, why do you need five? Why can't you dimension it down? Use dimensions to get to where you can see your number only. And they will present their case. And at that point, the group makes a decision. Yes, we will add this to the ERP system, or no, we won't. Um, and then we move forward. And that way, the roundtable, if you will, makes the decision. Everybody stays on the same page. And if it is added, then it is added to the data dictionary, and we move happily down the road, but everybody stays intact and on the same page, which I think is the most important thing. And where I see a lot of the gaps is not everybody's on the same page of the meaning of the data, what the data does, and therefore that's where you start getting into um, errors or it meaning two different things to two different people. And therefore, when you get executives, this is where I've seen it blow up most of the times. By the time it reaches the C-suite, an executive may have two or three different reports with the same data, and it's all different. And that's where usually it explodes. And so, why am I getting three reports with the same data points and they're
Yeah.
different? And that's where I've come in and said, okay, we got to fix this and start to streamline things, standardize things, to where we're all singing from the same hymnal, if you will.
Yeah. Yeah, that makes sense. And so when you so this roundtable idea is this it sounds like really supportive because then you've got people from the business and from IT all getting on the same page. Is this something that you came up with? Is it something, uh, kind of dig into that a little bit on the roundtable piece of this puzzle?
It was something that I was part of putting together at an earlier company, and it works so well that I brought it to other companies. I'm actually bringing it to my current company, to where we are going to all you know come together uh, at a predetermined basis on a predetermined basis and say, okay, this is what we have. This is our data. We're all going to agree upon these points, data points, meaning this is what, again, an account, a customer, and on down the line, this is what it all means. These are the calculations and document it all, and then continue to meet probably on either a monthly or quarterly basis, pulling people again from the business, whether it's operations, accounting, IT. Everybody has a seat at the table to listen and say, does this make sense in my area? Because the last thing I want to play is a game of pass the trash, meaning, well, while it works for me, downstream, I'm going to wreck somebody else's life. And so that's what I try to avoid in many areas, not only from data standpoints, but even when I'm doing system changes, meaning, are you going to wreck somebody else's life? We got to be cognizant of that. And so that's where, when you bring, um, give everybody a seat at the table, they feel like they're being heard and they're a part of what's going on, and it keeps everybody again on the same page moving forward, and things seem to flow a lot smoother when you at least bring people to the table. And believe me, bringing people to the table just means a lot to them, um, that they have a say, or at least they can listen and understand what's going on, that something's just not
Yeah.
dropped on their desk and say, here, this is a change. And they're like, what does this mean? Why wasn't I involved? And so I find that just having people have the ability just to listen or be involved makes all the difference in the world.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm sure everyone like can nod their head. Like the former situation that you mentioned is something that everyone's experienced. How do you, when you consider the right players to be at that table? Because, obviously you still want to be able to move forward. And, we've all heard the term, too many cooks in the kitchen. How do
Yep.
you find that balance between having the right people at the table and having too many people at the table?
Um, I look to leadership. I start with leadership to get the understanding of what they're looking for. Again, I mentioned the top leaders that end up with three reports with the same data, but saying three different things. To get them to understand and to document, this is what we as the company believe X, Y, or Z means, and then start funneling it down from there. So people like a controller, or a person from financial planning and analysis or external reporting, and then the
Yeah.
database person um, would definitely be involved. And then if you're lucky enough to have data stewards, and if you're lucky enough to have master data management type folks, uh, people in operations. If you're doing, if you're a company that's creating products, there's a lot of data flowing through those products being created. So you want to bring somebody from that. And so it's picking those people, those right players at each intersection, if you will,
Yeah,
and bringing them to the table. Um, but you also try to keep it, minimum, so you just don't have a room full of
right.
people. And so I leave it to the controller, assistant controller, and again, the VP of FP&A or one of his designees. And it also depends on the data that we're talking about. If there's HR data, well, I got to have somebody from HR there, and so it's just getting those right people that are usually designated by the leaders. This is the person that can speak for us. And sometimes it is the leader. They want to be able to want to speak, but it's getting
Right.
just a few people that can make the decision to move forward. And this is what it's going to be. And
Yeah.
and that's, you try to you can make a church big enough, or it's broad enough that everybody feel like they have a voice and is included, but not so big that it just becomes noise.
Yeah. That makes a lot of sense. I mean, this process seems so logical. Like it's so simple. A lot of times, in this modern era, I think we rely or yeah, we rely or blame or however you want to think of it, on the technology. And what I'm hearing from you is that the technology is a very, limited piece of the puzzle that still, and a lot of people worry about, AI taking over their jobs or what have you. But what I'm hearing from you is that people are still a really critical component of making these processes work.
Yeah, I am a firm believer in garbage in, garbage out, and I've written several responses to people. AI is smart. It's getting more intelligent by the day, and but the one thing I truly believe is whatever the AI is reading or using as a source, if it's bad data, it's going to spit out bad data. And it's actually one of my fears as people become more and more reliant on AI is what is the source of the data? And that's where I feel people are going to forever be valuable because we have that subjective reasoning that we live in reality, in the daily world. And so we understand that data point may or may not be good, or it may be skewed or whatever. And that's where I feel like the human is not going to go away. Even though AI will get smarter and smarter, we still have to be like a check and balance against, uh, is that data right? Is that data good? Uh, is that the best cut of the data? And we need to be there to make those decisions, to help it along, to keep refining, refining, refining until AI has got it. But I still feel
Yeah.
like the human's going to have a place in the world of making sure that the data is good, and it
Yeah.
speaks for what the company uh, wants, what its desires and how it wants to represent itself and how it wants its story to be told.
Yeah. So I totally agree with you. And going back to the example of like three reports coming, three different numbers, when you go about tackling, fixing a problem like that,
Mhm.
and you kind of described like you get people in the room, how long does it take, to clean up the data? How is it are you meeting daily, for months? Can you get something done like that, and a process fixed in weeks? What is the timeline to be able to get to that point where you have one source of truth for that particular report or whatever it is that you're working on?
It depends on the mess of how messy the data is. If the
Okay.
data is like truly, disastrous, and if you're trying to incorporate other systems through acquisition or whatever
Right.
into one data set, obviously it's going to take a lot longer than if you just have a single data set that's a little messy. And so you start as I'm looking at this issue as we speak, we start looking at what is the most painful points, and then begin to tear it apart or look under the hood. And there can be daily meetings, there can be weekly meetings as we begin, the process. There'll be times when we'll meet more. There'll be times when we meet less as we, send the data experts, the people putting the data reports together, away to go into their um, laboratory, if you will, and start creating these
Right.
reports and checking. But the hard work is, I think, getting out in front of it and saying, okay, what do we have, and start ripping it apart and seeing why we have differences, and start to build. If you don't have it, start to build that data governance, that data dictionary, and put all those pieces together and to understand those calculations. That's the hard upfront work where you might be meeting a lot and then you kind of go away and take a cut at it and then come back and start to really look at it again, and then hopefully you can get on your way again. With data that's coming from every different place, it's going to take a long time. And yes, you're going to have teams of people and meetings and start identifying data stewards and building crosswalk tables or mapping tables to really understand your data. So it really depends on the size and the scope um, uh, of what you're trying to accomplish.
Yeah, that makes sense. So, lest people be intimidated on, getting involved in one of these processes, what does it look like on the other side when you've got it fixed? Like what sort of time is saved? What sort of, what does it look like on the other side when you've got it?
The other side is tremendous because you get a giant sigh of relief from the company, and quickly things begin to accelerate, because at a time when, let's say, a leader is getting three different reports with three different numbers, they quickly lose trust in the data.
Mm,
And so therefore they're left scrambling, trying to figure out what is the truth, what is the source of truth. And once you have that data, again, that data structure locked down, that data dictionary, that single source of truth, and you can show what came in is what went out, and tie back to the original number, and gives people confidence, then you're just off and running, because
yeah,
you've regained that confidence and that trust, and you have built in the apparatus that you can trust these numbers, because we have built in um, that mechanism that says you can trust these numbers because we can tie it back to the original number. And here's our data governance all along the way. And so I'd say the two things is, you see a big sigh of relief from leadership, and then it just takes off like a rocket,
yeah,
because now they know I have a solid foundation. Like building a house. Once I have that solid foundation, the sticks start going up very quick.
right.
But getting that solid foundation in place is the most time consuming, to make sure you have the wall straight, and it can take the weight of everything above. And once you got that, everything else flies together. And that's
Yeah,
the same way with building out data.
yeah. And so this is kind of like a more, philosophical question, but I know you've participated in implementations and things like that. Um, this being so important and so foundational, why is it so often ignored? Or like, someone implements one system and they think it's not working, so they'll then go to another technology, when all along the problem was probably the process and the data. What are your
Yeah,
thoughts there?
one of my first articles was about uh, policies, processes, and then systems. And one thing I find is there's not a lot of policies aren't clear,
Yeah,
processes aren't standardized. It's kind of this is the way we've been doing things forever. Keep on inheriting stuff. Even people within the same department aren't doing the same thing the same way. And it just becomes a hodgepodge. It's the other person's problem. And when I work with the people like in the CFO area, it becomes clear. They have a schedule that they have to meet, and they have to report to the street if they're a public company, on X day, and they have to be closed within so many days. And so they live in ebbs and flows, and what I find is everybody thinks it's the other person's problem. Well, this is IT. They're taking care of it. And IT thinks, well, this is the business. They're taking care of it. And often what I find is the ball's laying on the ground and nobody picks up the ball and runs with it. And that's where I find myself jumping in a lot, is jumping on the ball and say, I'll pick it up and I'll run with it, and just start either bringing people to the table or asking questions. And that's where I find, I guess the biggest issue is the lack of communication of somebody saying, who really owns this? And everybody assumes that the other person is taking care of it or owns it, and doesn't really think about, this is my problem in my area. Because they all have day jobs and they're running, as most cases, as hard as they possibly can. And this is, while it's a very important issue, it's a secondary issue. They're still reporting the numbers and getting things out the door. IT is advancing, new technology, or keeping the lights on, and things of that nature. And so this kind of falls, on the floor at times, and it
yeah,
needs somebody to pick it up and say, hey, we got a problem. And like, as I started out, unfortunately, it usually rises to the level of people at the C-suite level are getting reports. And then when they find out I've got three different numbers of the same data point, then and it explodes. And
that's
then
when,
then things
yeah,
have
right.
to move.
That's when it gets taken care of. Yeah,
Yeah.
that makes a lot of sense. And so again, like it's kind of interesting too, because that office of the CFO and IT, traditionally, like we think of those two types of people as being very isolated, and they're now, in order for processes to work, really need to come together in a lot of meaningful ways and learn how to communicate and learn how to, do the things that are maybe outside of their traditional comfort zone. The IT being head down in the technology, and the finance people being head down in the numbers. And in order to make it work, it's like everybody needs to come together
True.
and examine processes and data, and then magically the technology works when you build that foundation like you were talking about.
And I think the biggest problem I find it, and where I feel like I can add a lot of value, is being able to talk each other's language. Because the one thing I find most often is the people within IT, they don't understand what the business does. They don't understand a balance sheet. They don't understand the P&L, or everything else that goes along with it. What a budget is. While they even maybe have to do budgets, they don't really understand the mechanics of it. And on the business side, they don't understand what a database is, or even a data dictionary, and those types of things. And so it's really bringing those two worlds together and translating for them. and helping them understand each other's world. And I think once that begins to take place, that's where the partnership really starts to take hold and say, okay, we each have a piece of this, and now I understand your piece, and I understand your piece, and it begins to gel together. But until you do that, they just keep running down their individual roads. While they may be parallel, they're speaking different languages, and I can't tell you how many different times I've had those. I've seen people in just very heated conversations, and it's all due because they just don't understand each other's world. And once you begin to bring that to the table,
Yeah,
then
how do you do that? Like what are some meaningful ways that you can, is it cross training? Is it just simply explaining, from one to the other? Like how have you been able to do that successfully?
um, I break it down into the simplest, the lowest common denominator, if you will, the simplest format that I can. I can remember walking past a cubicle one time, and it was one of my folks. Was I could just tell his face was as red as could be, and the person was from the revenue side. We were handling some reporting for revenue, and they weren't happy either. And so I just kind of stepped into the cubicle, and I think within 15 minutes, I had them both laughing. And it was because I just stopped and said, okay, this is what this person from revenue is trying to get. This is the data they're trying to get. And person from revenue, this is what this person is asking, but put it in a very simple context that they both could understand. And unfortunately, it's just been me with years and years of experience of being in both worlds to where I had to understand what a balance sheet is, what an income statement is, what FP&A is, what a budget is, what a forecast is, and all this the stuff that trickles down. And then my years, on the IT, understanding what databases are, and coding and how systems are built and how integrations happen. And it's just understanding it and then just bringing it down to a very simplistic level, that most anybody can understand, and then build from there. I'm not trying to get somebody that's an accountant trying to understand, C sharp programming. I'm just trying to understand the basics of needs, basic needs from each side, and then go from there and let them do what they do best, but break it down to its very basic form, basic level, and then just let each other take off and go from there. And it seems to have worked. At least I've been successful thus far. Not saying it always doesn't end up, with people getting in heated conversations or lack of understanding, but that's where I try to go, is just try to break it down to its most common form. I think everybody can, to where everybody can understand, and then just move and build from there.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And again, I get a lot of questions about, how can I level up my skill set? What I'm hearing from you is that if you are, in finance, you can level up your skill set by being curious about IT. And if you are in IT, you can be curious about finance or other departments, but understanding like the business side of things in addition to what you bring to the table, is an excellent way to, build up your skill set.
I think things like lunch and learns have been gone a long way. Like, this is what we do. I always find those fascinating, and I always try to attend and encourage companies to do those types of things. People think, well, this is boring. Nobody's going to want to attend, but really, it is interesting to see. What does AP do? What does procurement do, or what does a database person do? And it's kind of harkens me back to when I was a child, and you'd have career day, and somebody would come in and kind of tell you what they do. And it becomes fascinating. You learn more and more about the business and what's going on in each aspect of the business. And you just begin to, dive in a little bit more and a little bit more. And I've seen more times than I can count when I've attended these things, the light bulb goes on in my head of, oh, okay, I get it. This how this fits into, into our world or into the beginning to the end of our company. From us, it's, from getting a patient, meaning marketing, all the way to, the paying of the treatment. That's the complete end-to-end story. And hopefully getting that, obviously in our case, getting that person well, making their lives better. But it's then you begin to understand those pieces. I find in many companies it's so siloed. It's a
Right.
person even sitting next to each other within the same team. They don't understand what the person that next to them does to pass it along. And so I always advocate for have those lunch and learns. This is what this team does, or this is what this person does, and here's how it impacts the rest of the company.
Yeah, that's so simple too, right? I mean, not a
Yep.
huge cost investment. Like everyone likes to have lunch purchased for them, but on the side of the company, like that's not a huge investment.
No,
Another advantage that I see of doing that too is that um, is those who are really interested in those things, it also could provide them another career path.
it's true.
It could also be like now the wheels of my head are turning here, but it also could be a way to identify your A players. You know, those who are consistently attending those lunch and learns and making an effort to, really understand the company end to end. Like you're kind of watching the cream rise to the top, if you will, by providing these types of opportunities.
Yep.
So really simple, but hugely practical in its implications.
Yep.
Um, are there any other thoughts that you have? Anything that I failed to ask when it comes to um, data? Anything that we've discussed that think is important for others to hear? Something that you've really had to learn the hard way that you want to express to kind of wrap us up?
I just think it's you always want to get to that single source of truth that everybody can depend upon. And when you get to that single source of truth, that you make it as bulletproof as possible. And when I say that, I mean that you have data integrity, that you have data, I can tell you where the data came from, how it changed during the process. And that's where I really believe. And then you have gatekeepers. There's the one source of truth as the system, but as I mentioned before, that you have that data dictionary and you have that governance framework around it. And the more controlled that you get that and you have those rules established, I think the rest becomes it just falls into place. And I think the last thing is the last subject we talked about is people have got to communicate. We have got to stop um, uh, thinking a text or an email is going to suffice. You have to get people face to face, as you and I are right now, talking and having conversations about whatever. I just recently read something where a gentleman gave up his not his iPhone, but his smartphone because he wanted to talk to people more, and so now he calls them instead of text them to get that interaction. And I think quickly that has been something we've quickly lost over the past decade. People have kind of quit talking to each other. And I think we need to bring that back more to where people are having conversations face to face, verbally, to where we see each other's body language. There's no misnomers in what we're saying. And there's that opportunity to have an exchange of ideas, not through an email or I don't understand the tone and things like that where now you've shifted off to you're worried about if somebody's mad or what their tone is as opposed to the ideas that you were trying to exchange. So that would be the last piece is talk to each other, uh, have conversations, uh, uh, to understand one another. That's to me that's the last piece.
Yeah, so good. It's like it's so simple. It almost seems like, can it really be that easy? You know? But to your point, we have because it can feel easier to use our thumbs and send a text, like
Yeah.
especially when the conversation is perceived as difficult. Like I'm just gonna, break up with you over text, right? That's kind of like the joke. But I think that especially those of us who, grew up without cell phones and maybe have that a little bit more grounding in how to have conversations can begin to pass that on to the next generations that are coming up behind us. And it really can be that simple, getting someone face to face, like you said, it's a lot more difficult to misinterpret. And especially if there's someone in the room like you who is like there to read the body language of the person who's getting a little upset and then be the interpreter for the person who is trying to explain what's going on, And so it is a really underrated skill, communication. So
Yep.
perfect. Well, yeah, go
Yeah.
ahead.
And today, just in today's world, I noticed the younger folks, and I'm surrounded by them. I'll go out and just talk to them, just to talk to them, to get that, to plant that seed of we might have a different conversation down the road, but I just want to have a conversation where we're talking. So the first time you see me is not going to be when we're having some kind of other conversation.
Right.
So I just begin that, hey, and these are all young kids just fresh out of school, let's have a conversation. Let's just talk. What's your, not maybe as simple as what's your favorite color, but just, hey, how's it going? How you feeling? What's going on? What do you think about this? And just to get that ball rolling so when we need to have these conversations, the groundwork has been laid. And I'll end
Yeah.
with that.
No, that's perfect. I mean that because that makes it so simple too. Like you're saying that way the first conversation doesn't be whoops, doesn't have to be that difficult conversation, but you can just start by just talking. Just talk.
Yes,
I
yes.
love it. I love it. Well, I've been enlightened by this, so I really do appreciate you taking the time to, out of your busy and hectic day to answer these questions. And I do think this will help, a lot of people who are in the throes of it right now, and especially those who are maybe considering implementing something, because maybe you're not ready.
Yeah,
Maybe put it off a few months and
yeah.
and look at your data and look at your governance and make sure those are right before you go with the whatever system it is you're looking at or what have you. So again, I do appreciate it and we'll make sure that this gets out to the broadest audience we possibly can.
It was a pleasure. I've had a lot of fun talking about this. As you know, I could probably talk about a bazillion things, but thank you so much for the opportunity. It was great fun.
Good. All right. Thanks, John.